because everything that happened post the planning of the Union Jack at Possession Point, that is Australian history. And so I'm writing these stories so that they become a natural part of understanding who we are as a nation. And we can only understand where we are and where we're going when we understand where we've come from. Yiridumarang, Yuandu Anita Heiss, Balladu Wiradjuri Geerlung. Hello everybody, my name's Anita Heiss and I have Wiradjuri belonging from central New South Wales, from Cowra and from Brungle, and I'm the author of Dirrayawadha, Rise Up, published by Simon & Schuster. This is an historical novel that is set in the 1820s on Wiradjuri country in central New South Wales in the town of Bathurst, which was the first inland city in Australia. And it is really the story of the resilience and the resistance of Wiradjuri people against the overtaking of their land. So the dispossession, the displacement, the violence, the frontier violence that came with that. It is what some people have regarded as the Forgotten Wars. We know Henry Reynolds calls the Forgotten Wars or the Frontier Wars, or as Dinawang Jirabung, Uncle Bill Allen, who's a direct descendant of Windradyne, the Wiradjuri warrior, he calls it the Homeland Wars. So it's a novel about those wars, but through that story, I've told the story largely through a love story between a fictional character, Mina, and an Irish political convict. So I could draw together the similarities in terms of the desire for sovereignty that the Irish wanted from the British, and of course, what Wiradjuri people still want from the British. It's not my first book. It is my third historical novel, but I've also published 6 commercial women's novels aside from that. Rom-coms set, some of them set in Coogee, Melbourne, Manhattan and Paris. Another novel called Tidders, which your viewers and people who come into your beautiful shop would know the band from between 1990 and 2000, and that Tidders means your sister or your BFF, and that's been turned into a play for the Sydney Festival and the Brisbane Festival. And I've written a number of children's novels and one picture book called Biddigaling, which is the children's version of Billa Yadadangalang Duray about the Great Flood of Gundagai. I have a memoir titled Am I Black Enough for You? And some other bits and pieces as well. Yes, I have another one that I have been commissioned to write by Simon & Schuster, and it hasn't got the title yet. It'll probably have a language title like Dirrayawadha and Billa Yadadangalang Duray. But it's about the long walk from Brungle into Parliament House in Canberra in 1927 when Jimmy Clements and John Noble did the long walk to make a statement about sovereignty as well and rights, but weren't allowed into Parliament House, obviously. They had no shoes on, but they did meet the Queen at the time. So there will be a reenactment of that long walk in 2027. And so I want to write the story of those incredible men who are legends to us and also Australian icons. There's a very iconic photo that many of your readers will have, when they see it, they go, yeah, I've seen that photo of Jimmy Clements on the steps of Parliament House. It's really about writing us into the Australian literary landscape in spaces where we've never been. We've either been misrepresented or not represented at all. And this is shared history. It's not just Wiradjuri history or First Nations history, because everything that happened post the planning of the Union Jack at Possession Point, that is Australian history. And so I'm writing these stories so that they become a natural part of understanding who we are as a nation. And we can only understand where we are and where we're going when we understand where we've come from. I first read about Windradyne back in the late 1980s. So the late Mary Coe wrote a book called Windradyne, a Wiradjuri Koori, and it's a slim volume, but I always remembered my vision of this man being very strong and staunch, but also very sensitive, because he led the Battle of Bathurst in 1824 when there was a proclamation of martial law on the 14th of August, 1824. And he led very strategic acts of resistance, many revenge attacks for how Wiradjuri people were treated, unspeakable violence against particularly Wiradjuri women. And I imagined him to be this very strong-spirited, proud man who was fighting for the rights to retain sovereignty and so forth. But then towards the end of 1824, when the violence had become unbearable post the proclamation of martial law, he also led his people, my ancestors, and other people from other nations over the Blue Mountains into Parramatta to meet with Governor Brisbane to talk about peace. So he was also a peacemaker. And I read about him. He was born circa 1800 and passed away in 1829. And he was known as Saturday by the colonial project, the people running the colonial project, the settlers, the authorities, because a lot of the attacks happened on a Saturday. So they assumed this was all a strategy. I'm fairly sure that Windradine was not working to a Western calendar. So I knew I wanted to tell this story because I think everybody should know about our warriors and our resistance fighters, but also understand that the way in which this country was colonised was not only most often not peaceful, but more often than not quite brutal and violent. And so I went, obviously went to Bathurst. I go to Bathurst every year to work with kids in schools, so I already have a relationship with people in Bathurst. Interestingly, Uncle Bill Allen, my mother wore his mother's veil when she got married in a church in Redfern in 1960, but that was a by the by. But I went to Bathurst, I walked along the Womble. Well, the Womble is the traditional name for the Macquarie River. So, because obviously we had our own names for rivers before, governors named these things after themselves. And so we are known as the people of the three rivers, the Galari, which is the Lachlan, the Womble, which is the Macquarie, and the Murrumbidgee, which is the Murrumbidgee. So I spent time on country. I had to imagine, because it is, I have to imagine what Windradine was thinking as the landscape's changing and people are dying. So I walked along that. I stood atop Walu, and your beautiful customers will know that as Mount Panorama, right? So I stood atop Walu, and I was in places where I knew corroborees used to happen, and they hadn't happened for 200 years until this year on the anniversary of the proclamation of martial law, right? So there is a lot of documentation. It was documented as a war by the officials. So it's interesting that we talk about wars, but never on our own soil. And it was the Battle of Bathurst, the Bathurst Wars. I read an incredible book, which you might know of. It's by Stephen Gapps, called Guchera, and it's the first Bathurst Wars. And he had done this extraordinary research, but he documented every single act of violence, which my book doesn't do. Having said that, readers will absolutely be sure of and know what happened. But I didn't want to write that. I mean, I'm writing obviously historical fiction and commercial fiction, and I wanted to speak to kids in high school and women in book clubs and people who may be reading English as a second language. I want to reach as big an audience as possible. And so I feel that historical fiction is a good way to do that. So I spent time in Bathurst. The Bathurst Library did an incredible job at curating a whole lot of material for me. So I emailed, or I rang up, I said, I'm coming down. Or maybe I dropped in and visited, and I said, I'm coming back, and I get there and there's a trolley of material. They also helped me access the original, copies of the original documents from the proclamation and so forth, because I wanted to include those in the back of the book so people could actually see the real documentation. So I had that as well. And as I said, it is fictional. So I had to create this love story. I did have a researcher, Sonia Mitchell, and she mined our archives, but also the Irish archives, because I needed to find out, how many political prisoners came to Australia. And of course, there were hundreds of Irish political convicts who were part of uprisings in Ireland against their parliament becoming part of the British Parliament, because they saw that as the death of their sovereignty, which is exactly our experience as well. And so I had to do that as well. I had a friend who's an avid, he's Irish, lives in Brisbane, and an avid reader of history. So I got him, and he had so much knowledge just growing up in Ireland. So he helped me think about locations and what Daniel O'Dwyer would be, what his parents would have done, what their houses would have looked like, and so forth, because I clearly didn't know that. So I had a lot of assistance. Troy Caster Daly, which many of you will know is a fantastic country and western singer, and he released a song through Mushroom Records about Winterdyne. And I think he launched it in NAIDOC week, actually. And he gave it as a gift to myself and to Wiradjuri people, the song lyrics. So they're in the book as well. So there's a whole lot of material in there bringing together the desire of many people, and this is the crux of the whole thing, truth-telling. So the book is really about truth-telling in Australia. And regardless of whether you voted yes or no, in October last year, the truth is that 6.2 million people voted yes to truth-telling. And that tells me that they want to learn, they want to participate and so forth. And I've done many events already around in, different cities. And those people that come out on wet, windy nights on Mondays and, 100 people, they're there because they want to be part of what's next. Drafts went to the Bathurst Local Aboriginal Land Council, the Wiradjuri Traditional Owners Central West Corporation. Uncle Stan Grant was my language teacher, and his protege Letitia Grant double-checked all the language for me. So because in my world, the methodology and the protocol is that it's really about the community. So it's very different to a Western way of writing. Westerners go, as an artist, I have the right to write whatever I want. That's not how we think. I have a responsibility to the people I'm writing about. Like, I don't own this story, even though I have lineage and kinship in Wiradjuri country. It's not my story. And it really is a story for the city of Bathurst, who have fully embraced their history, because Bathurst actually also has a level of responsibility, because what happened in Bathurst in the 1820s, and this was pointed out to me by a local council in Bathurst, what happened in Bathurst in the 1820s, it was the beginning of what happened across the country, because it was the first place to have martial law, where basically settlers and the redcoats and the authorities were given the permission to use violence, if it brings peace. So my father was Austrian. He didn't speak English when we met my mother, fell in love with her, stalked her in Redfern, although it was called courting in those days. And they were poor people living in the suburbs of Matchville. And one of their first sets of friends were these poor Irish couple. And so we grew up as family. And what connected them were family values, work ethics, and being poor. And so I never understood till I was much older why we had this strong connection. But then I learned, your listeners, or you might even listeners, your customers will know the word deadly. So we use the word deadly in Black communities. Deadly means it's awesome. We got that from the Irish. We got that from the Irish. The Irish use it to mean extreme or awesomeness or whatever, extreme wonderful. And so I think this idea of the Irish who came to Australia, many seeking a better life, but also these political convicts who were uprising themselves, doing these uprisings, while we also were uprising. The Wiradjuri people were rising up against, the fact that they never ceded their sovereignty over land. So those two histories together, but the fact that they came here and built relationships, and in the 19th century, the Irish were poor as well. They were poor. They had all the menial jobs, and it was generations later before, they moved into a different space in Australia. And I think about the Irish people in my life, and I don't know if they know the connection that we have. We know the personal connections, but I want them to know also that what they were fighting against back home is exactly what we're still fighting against here, right? But I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, I want them to understand that connection for us is very strong. And we're seeing that now also internationally with the Irish, with the Palestinians, with blackfellas and the Palestinians, because that dispossession, that displacement, that denial of human rights, that is something that we all share. And you'll see online the absolute outpouring of support from the Irish for Palestine, as you'll see with my community as well. For not all of the community, let's be clear about that, but for many of the community. And so, and I also want I want our mob to understand that as well, that the Irish are like us in terms of defending their rights to, political voice and so forth against the British. But also I hope to bring not just into my story, but Irish readers into all First Nations stories. Because I think constantly we're trying to build readership, because the readership then builds knowledge, builds allyship, as you mentioned, and then we can all one day move forward with Yingamata, gently, gently. The truth is, there was a family called the Sutters, and they have a property called Brucedale. And I didn't want to write that story, but there is this actual family. They still exist. They were there participating in the commemorations recently. Now, this family, the story has it that William Sutter was the owner at the time, and Windradyne turned up at Brucedale, angry, ready for conflict, and William Sutter spoke to him in the Wiradjuri language. And then they formed an alliance of sorts, and this is carried on through history. And so that family, the Sutters, during all that conflict and bloodshed and violence, brutality, were safe also. And Wiradjuri people who were there were safe. And so what I wanted to show, I didn't want to write that story because I wanted to do the Irish story, and also Andrew Nugent and that Nugent family. I mean, I've created them fictionally in the 1820s, but it's a real family because I auctioned off for charity a character name. And Andrew Nugent, who is a winemaker in South Australia and a huge supporter of the Adam Goodes Michael O'Loughlin Foundation, of which I'm an ambassador, he bought it. And it was really interesting. So I Zoomed with him and I said to him, tell me about your family. And I thought, this is great. I want to have this Irish family. I will use your family characters, the dogs and everything. And it gave me an anchor. But what I wanted to show with that family and with Daniel O'Dwyer, who just falls in love with Mina, right? Like normal human beings fall in love. It's got anything to do with race, hasn't got socioeconomics, hasn't got anything to do with this pure act of love. So what I wanted to do with all of that was, first of all, a reminder that Wiradjuri people and First Nations peoples generally have loved on this Nurrumbung, this land, for millennia. It's not new. We've loved as parents and children and siblings and extended kin and as lovers, right? That's always happened. It's always happened, but you don't see that. We're not written as if we're normal human beings having everyday relationships and caring, loving, kind, thoughtful, considerate, gentle humans. You don't see that unless we write it. And I write people that I see. So I wanted to show that through that. And also I grew up in a biracial household. I know it's completely possible, but I wanted to show through their relationship and through the relationship of the Nugents with Windradyne and the Wiradjuri peoples that coexistence is possible when there is respect, so when there's Yingamata, and when there's love. Now, obviously, the Nugents and the Irish, even the convicts, there was still a hierarchy. Even though there's coexistence and there's respect, you know, that they still had more power and were always going to have more power than the blackfellas, right? But I wanted to show that this has happened. And what's interesting is when they talk about the Sutters back in the day, it's like they were extraordinary because they were kind. So I struggle with that myself because I'm going, they were just, for the times, it was quite extraordinary. I don't think we need to keep saying that there's this wonderful act of reconciliation now because we know that, well, this is more my own view, right? But I wanted to show that I know firsthand that when you respect another person's culture, it is possible to live side by side, even though acknowledging the imbalance of power there. Absolutely. Back in the day when we had dictionaries, you know, I'd be the person with the dictionary next to the bed and I'd be looking up words all the time. And I always said, I'll never be an award-winning literary writer. Not a literary writer even because I don't have the vocab. And it wasn't until I wrote Billa Yadadangalang Duray, which means River of Dreams, that I realised that the vocab that I didn't have was the Wiradjuri vocab. And writing about Wiradjuri Nurrumbung, about the land and about our values and about love and Megan and family and so forth is so much more significant and so much richer when I can use the language from the land. And I can't imagine now writing a book that's set on Wiradjuri country, and I'm not going to write historical novels that aren't on my own country anyway, without embedding language. I'm currently a publisher with Schuster, my own imprint, First Nations imprint. I'm very excited. It's called Bunji. Bunji is a Wiradjuri word that means to share with me, and I think that's what writers do and publishers do with sharing stories. And my first acquisition was Stan Grant's beautiful meditation on land and life and family, his father, theology, there's music, there's physics, there's poetry, and that's coming out for Christmas, just in time for a beautiful hardcover book. It's called Muriang, Song of Time. I've also commissioned Tasma Walton, and she's written an historical novel, an incredible historical novel about one of her ancestors called I Am Nanurtguruk, and that comes out in April next year. I've also commissioned Larissa Berent, and she's reimagining Pride and Prejudice through her First Nations lens. Yeah, so that's incredible. So a few more books on the boil. So it's a hard work being a publisher. So I'm doing that. But I've got a 3-book contract with Simon & Schuster, and I'm really excited because it was quite traumatic writing Dirrayawadha, having to read all that material, then translate it into something, for want of a better word, something palatable to an Australian audience to learn, right? So that's the job of the author, to simplify the complicated into whatever genre, whether it's a kid's picture book or a YA book or whatever, to reach a particular audience. And so talking about it on this book tour has actually been really exhausting because it's now reliving all those things. But my next book is set in Hawaii. So for your customers, I'm working on that, and that's about women in their 50s where the whole world said you're menopausal and everything's dried up, you love life, everything, and they're like, we are loving ourselves sick for the first time, right? So empowering women in their 50s to be noticed and not be invisible anymore. And so I've got that. That's due in April, but in July, Simon & Schuster will be releasing a book called, working on the title. It was published as an Audible original as Red Dust Running, but we're talking about changing the title, and that's about a Wiradjuri girl living in Brisbane who runs an art gallery and accidentally falls in love with a cowboy, because I always wanted to go to a rodeo, right? Don't need to go to another one. I'm glad I did it. So we've got a vegan animal rights person in the novel. And so that was lots of fun. So when I come back to visit, next year, I will be in my hat, my checkered shirt, my bling buckle. I've got all the bling, the boots. So I'm looking forward to that, because you can't write all the serious stuff. I can't nonstop, because part of that's duty of care to yourself, yeah? And so I've got the Long Walk book, and that's coming out in 2027. And then the Hawaii book is a set of 3. So the second one in that is set on a cruise, because blackfellas go on cruises too. Can I tell you? I got on a boat in Sydney. 86 blackfellas got on wearing the same shirt. I didn't know them. I was on my birthday cruise. I was someone's birthday cruise. So I started talking to someone. It was my cousin from Brungle. And I go, what are you doing here? And they're going, oh, it's a big reunion. 86 of them. So we go on cruises. So it's also about breaking down those stereotypes. We're everywhere if you want to see us. And then the third one is I've got a character, there's 3 women, and she's never seen snow. This black fella's never seen snow. So they're going to Club Med St. Moritz. And because that research is going to be fantastic. Simon & Schuster, looking at you, got to go research in St. Moritz. Mundangul, that's thank you in Wiradjuri. Thank you for having me. I don't know where I've been. I don't know where I'm going. Been holding on to the past, but this life keeps on moving. Don't you worry.